The purpose of the B-1 flight test program is to validate the performance of the B-1 to assure that the aircraft can meet its demanding functional and operational requirements. This film reports the progress thus far in flight testing B-1 aircraft 1, 2, and 3. Reports the key milestones that have been met and successfully completed. Demonstrates why the B-1 is described as the most thoroughly tested aircraft in the history of manned flight. The result of 6 years of detailed development, the B-1 has consistently proven its ability to perform its mission in the air. Well in advance of the scheduled production decision, the 3 flying B-1 aircraft have completed well over 300 hours of exacting flight tests. But as the test flights continue, other important chapters in the B-1 test story are being written on the ground. In the fatigue test laboratory, where critical segments of B-1 structure are simultaneously being tested to the equivalent of 4 complete aircraft lives. This design verification test specimen is an exact functional replica of the actual wing carry-through structure and wing of the flying B-1. These ground tests confirm the structural integrity of the B-1 airframe design and provide a solid scientific basis for predicting long-term in-the-air performance. Similar tests are in process for the tail assembly. These tests complement and support the flight test program. These fatigue tests provide assurance that as the flight test program opens up more and more of the B-1 flight envelope, the critical flight data can be obtained with a high degree of predictability. A successful flight test program is one which not only achieves all of the projected milestones, but one which accomplishes these objectives without surprises. The B-1 flight test program is such a success. The primary B-1 mission is low-level, high subsonic penetration of an enemy's innermost defenses. The B-1 is demonstrating this capability with signal success. Over water, over terrain, in both manual and automatic flight modes. And these have been not one-time showcase demonstrations, but a precise, disciplined progression of engineering procedures which have established this performance requirement as an irrefutable, documented fact. The same is true of the other key elements of B-1 performance. The B-1 has validated its ability to achieve high-speed, high-altitude flight. 2.1 Mach at 50,000 feet. To refuel safely and efficiently in the air using standard aerial tankers from existing Air Force inventory. To function as a successful weapons platform. To make relatively long navigational flights over a 5-state area. All this in addition to the basic requirement to validate basic flying and handling qualities. At every step of the test program, the B-1 has performed as predicted. Predictions based on the most thorough wind tunnel evaluation ever performed for any aircraft. Over 21,000 hours of detailed wind tunnel testing completed well before the first B-1 flew. And the new GE F-101 engines, untried, never before flight tested. Yet before first flight, this all-new power plant was fully validated through test after test after test. Performance as predicted. There have been no surprises. Much of the success of the B-1 flight test program is due to the unique team approach adopted for this effort. The full contractor Air Force partnership was formed long before the first B-1 flew, and has meant that the test results have an added measure of validity. Each step of the flight test program has been conducted under conditions designed to approximate the anticipated B-1 mission environment, rather than in a sterile laboratory situation. This has added a level of validity to the program that would not have been possible had the program been conducted without this sort of close, day-to-day cooperation in the planning, execution, and evaluation. From its beginning in December 1974 with the first flight of aircraft number 1, The flight test program has grown and expanded to include all three RDT&E aircraft. The structural test aircraft was added to the B-1 fleet 2 weeks ahead of schedule. After 6 full months of total strength testing on the ground. Tests that made absolutely certain that the B-1 could sustain the predicted air loads with a comfortable safety margin. And the test program has grown in other ways. Grown to include the checkout and validation of the instrument and offensive avionics systems. Again, these test regimes were thoroughly validated in the lab well in advance of actual airborne commitment. This carefully planned, conservative approach has worked. Worked so well, in fact, that on its first flight, the third B-1 test aircraft and its offensive avionics system performed at a level that it would have made it possible to complete nearly 80% of an actual operational mission. Success in the air is the result of long, hard years of preparation on the ground, in the lab, at the drawing board, testing, questioning, improving, and then checking once more to be absolutely sure. The B-1 program is a success because it was planned that way, because it was organized around a complete research, development, test, and evaluation program that makes success a predictable fact. The flight test program is demonstrating that the B-1 performs, confirming in the air that complete testing pays off in predictable success.
General Russell E. Doherty, commander of the Strategic Air Command, accompanies pilots Major George Larson and Charlie Bach of Rockwell on a pre-flight inspection of the number 3 B-1 before boarding for the 14th flight of this, the avionics test airplane. The extremely successful flight lasted 9 hours and 6 minutes. With General Doherty, a command pilot with 34 years experience, flying in the left seat for the entire mission and making a smooth landing to climax a big day. General Doherty was elated after the mission and said in a plainside interview,
"Well, I've just realized the thrill of a career when I found out I was going to command SAC. I hoped I'd have an opportunity to fly the B-1, and today I have, for over 9 hours, on a completely bomber-type mission. And it was just a great mission for me. I've been flying 34 years. I've flown most of the bombers that Strategic Air Command has used and that we used in World War II. And I've never flown anything as incredible as this one. It offers the potential to truly be the greatest aircraft we've ever had in the inventory. I just wish we had it now. Unfortunately, there's no way that this airplane can come on in my watch. But to the extent that I have anything to do with the procurement of it as the Commander-in-Chief of SAC, I hope I can leave it for my successors as those that preceded me left great airplanes, great missiles, and great people in the Strategic Air Command for me. I flew with Mr. Charlie Bach, Chief Test Pilot for Rockwell on the B-1, and the other pilot on the flight was Major George Larson. George is a SAC pilot, and I'm delighted to say an expert in the B-1. I think they will agree with me that the airplane does everything spectacularly, but the thing it does best is what it's designed to do, and that's fly at treetop level, all kinds of terrain, and deliver accurate ordnance. I guess I flew the airplane today for everyone in SAC. The Chief told me early on that one pilot from SAC other than Major Larson could fly the airplane, and I'm that pilot. So I tried to represent all the 140,000 people in the command today, and certainly I'd like to say to Mr. Buzz hello, and to Mr. Meyer and all the people at Rockwell just how much I appreciate the way the airplane has been brought along, the way it flies. I don't know that there are any GE men present tonight, but I'd certainly like to tell them those engines are magnificent. Boeing, the avionics are just beginning to grow. We've got all sorts of capability, and I saw a lot of it demonstrated today. So I think we're off and running. If we can just cease to become a political issue and start to becoming a defense issue, as it should be, then I think we're going to have a great airplane for SAC. And I think we can operate it, maintain it, and take care of it, and do something that no other bomber can do, and that's be a viable penetrating bomber in the year 2000. We can do a lot with our FB-111s. We can do a lot with our B-52s. But one thing that concerns me is what are we going to be doing 20 years, 30 years from now? With this B-1 in the inventory, I think I know what we can be doing. And that's the same thing that SAC is designed to do and has been doing for 30 years. Practice its motto of peace is our profession.
This is a damn rough ride, and today it's faced by every Strategic Air Command pilot. Pushing a big jet through low-altitude turbulence at high speed is no picnic. 12 years ago, when I made these test flights, no one would believe how tough it was on the crew. You jolt along, reach for a switch and hit the wrong one. Cross-check the instruments, but they're a blur. The first 20 minutes of this can be exhausting. Flying 3, 4, or 5 hours is one of the toughest jobs a SAC crew has to face. You can beef up the airplane, but you can't beef up the crew. They just have to take the punishment. We were on a low-altitude penetration run, down on the deck at high speed. This is contour flying. You've got to be alert every second to keep from being spread all over the landscape. If you're just out sightseeing, it can be easy. But at near sonic speeds, it gets to be harrowing. You don't want to miss a turn down here. It could drop the mission efficiency to 0. What are we doing down here getting our kidneys jolted loose? We're hiding from radar. Down here, you're uncomfortable, but you're invisible to the enemy defenses. At low altitude, you can hide in the terrain, look like part of the landscape to radar. Stay low, and you can have the advantage of surprise. But this advantage isn't free. We pay for it with crew fatigue and the increased probability of making a costly mistake. Fatigue is the problem, but we think there's a solution. We took another look at our research, the background to the problem, and found that low-altitude turbulence is just a part of the difficulty. If you take a look at a large, fast airframe, you find the fuselage quite slender, jutting far out from its supporting wing. When you fly into turbulence, initial penetration of a gust has little effect on the fuselage. But when the gust hits the wing, it produces a sharp increase in lift, and the plane rises suddenly. Because the fuselage is slender, it lags behind. It bends downward. When the gust passes, lift drops to normal, and the plane stops rising. But the fuselage now catches up, springs back, whipping up and down until it finally settles. With violent gusting, lift is rapidly increasing and decreasing. So the crew is at the end of a springboard, and this makes for a very bad, very rough ride. We've got our crew sitting out on the end of a spring, somewhat like this. If a gust bends the spring, it wants to rebound. So the crew is being oscillated with every gust. If turbulence is steady, so is the vibration. It doesn't take much of this before you're really exhausted. Every long fuselage has this aeroelastic tendency, and we've been living with it. But now we see a practical solution for the B-1. Step one of the solution is to penetrate with the wings swept back fully. This reduces the amount of lift increase as the gust hits the wing. Then, for our new ride control, we add a vane on either side of the nose. They're movable little wings. They produce lift in either direction, and this lift force checks any fuselage motion. When a gust hits, the fuselage still wants to bend, but we sense it immediately, and the vane tilts to produce an opposing lift and stop the bending. In effect, it works like the shock absorbers on your car. What does this mean to the crew? Without vanes, they get the usual jolting, fatiguing ride. With vanes, the crew compartment is far more stable. There's a dramatic difference here. And it's obvious that adding ride control makes it easier on the airframe, too. The fuselage also wants to bend laterally. We use the same approach, the same type of control system to damp out this motion. The control system for this is quite simple. It's really no different than the yaw dampers that have been in use for the last 15 years. And the vanes have had their flight experience, too. The XB-70 used them in a successful flight research program that nailed down some precise facts on fuselage bending.
We live with that sort of a ride today. We can correct it to this. We can't repeal turbulence, but we can find a way to suppress its effects. We've set up severe conditions in the simulator to demonstrate the degree of improvement. Here we're flying with the vanes, but we can turn off our ride control system. This really is rough as I remember it. Taking this sort of punishment for hours is hardly an ideal situation. Mission success or mission failure could well depend upon the fatigue factor, and that's why we think ride control is important. We don't think things have to be that bad for a SAC crew making a low-altitude, high-speed penetration.
We've added ride control to the design of the B-1 to improve its efficiency as a weapon system and to give the crew the opportunity to operate under the best possible flight conditions.
My fellow employees, we at Rockwell have a very critical situation that's developed that I'd like to take the opportunity to talk with you about today. Many of you know that we have been under development of the B-1 supersonic bomber now for over 5 years. It's been an outstanding program. The aircraft, as developed and in flight tested, is meeting every requirement of the mission set forth by the Air Force, and we've done so under very close cost control. We can be proud of the job that our company has done on this program. But we have a problem. This aircraft and this program is undergoing an unprecedented attack by a vocal and very well-organized group. So I'd like to take this means to speak directly with you, the men and women of Rockwell International. We need your help, and we need it right now. Here's why. This small but very active group of individuals and organizations has been literally bombarding our Congress with anti-B-1 propaganda in the form of mail and phone calls and wires. You see, there's an extremely important vote due on the B-1 probably next week. A special issue of Rockwell News will explain this in a lot more detail, so I won't go into it now, except to say that the issue appears innocent enough, a delay of some 3 or 4 months to allow the new president to take a look at this program. Actually, the avowed intentions of this group are quite simple. They plan to delay the program, and then by and through the delay, to kill the program. What's most unfortunate is that many members of Congress, hearing only the discordant voices of this small group, may assume that they are representative of what all America thinks about our national defense. I just read a public opinion poll taken about a month ago in West Virginia, which shows exactly the opposite to be true. This poll indicates that 9 out of 10 Americans believe in a strong national defense. And of those who have heard about the B-1 program, over 70% believe it should go into production right now. Perhaps more importantly, every military and civilian leader in the Department of Defense who has studied the entire strategic bomber issue has concluded the U.S. must have a new penetrating supersonic bomber to replace the aging B-52. As I said, the ground and flight tests have established clearly that the B-1 can fulfill that important and demanding mission. If you share this conviction, I'd like to ask that you do something about it now, this week, because time is critical. I'd like to ask that you write, wire, or call, or even talk to, if it's in your area, your U.S. congressman or your U.S. senator, and let him know your views. It's important for us to help set this record straight. I know I can count on your help today. Thank you.
Edwards Air Force Base, Friday, June 11th, 1976. Aircraft 3 makes a series of spectacular low-altitude airspeed calibration runs, streaking along the Edwards flyby line at 650 miles an hour, less than 200 feet above the ground, proving again that the B-1 performs in the air where it counts. Palmdale, Monday, June 14th, 1976. The FOD squad hoses down the area forward of the engine inlets. It's time for another first flight. This time it's Aircraft 2, the structural test B-1. It's all checked out and ready to go from Palmdale, where it was assembled, to Edwards Air Force Base. The crew for this flight that adds a third aircraft to the B-1 flight test fleet includes Doug Benefield, pilot, and Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Ed McDowell, co-pilot. Rockwell's Jack Baldwin makes his flying debut as B-1 flight test engineer. The crew completes its pre-flight checks and Aircraft 2 moves away from the engine run-up pad at Palmdale. Benefield is at the controls as Aircraft 2 lifts off the Pawndale runway a full 2 weeks ahead of schedule, headed for Edwards to join Aircraft 1 and 3. The main objective of this first mission is to check out basic subsystems, such as flight controls and landing gear. Two hours and 9 minutes later, Aircraft 2 lets down over Edwards, headed for another smooth B-1 landing. It's like old home week as Aircraft 2 joins its sister ships on the apron at Edwards to pose for a long-awaited family portrait. With a busy flight test schedule, it might be a long time before all three B-1 aircraft will be available for formal photographs at the same time. Aircraft 2 has moved between Aircraft 1 on the left and Aircraft 3 on the right. And there they are, the B-1s, Aircraft 1, 2, and 3, nucleus of the B-1 fleet. Edwards Air Force Base, Wednesday, June 16, 1976, only 2 days after the first flight of number 2 and the third B-1 test flight in 6 days. It's time for the 33rd test flight for Aircraft 1, an important day in the B-1 program. Today is the day the B-1 becomes a bomber. The high-speed camera captures a perfect separation. The inert SRAM missile clears the weapon bay and drops away. June 1976. It's the anniversary month for the B-1 program, marking 6 years of progress. In this month, Aircraft 3 performed low-level speed calibration runs. Aircraft 1 demonstrated successful weapon separation. Aircraft 2 was added to the flight test fleet. And also in June, a major milestone was achieved when the 200th hour of B-1 flight testing was logged. 200 solid hours of flying proof that the B-1 is as good in the air as it looked on paper 6 years ago.